Oh man, this episode is going to be so fun. I'm about to talk with Aaron Comes, who's a founding member of the Spin Doctors. This is a Grammy nominated 10 million plus album selling band. And not just that, he's played on, written, or produced over 200 additional albums. He's still making music. He's playing in the New York jazz scene. He is touring. He is producing. He has got the dream career, right? And so let's hear from him how he did it and his advice for other players and how to make it happen. And then also, how did he take some of his unique personal style and apply that to a pop band that really, honestly, it changed the sound of the 90s and up to this day. Little ideas like snare drum placement and decisions and sticking to your guns, like all this really cool stuff that I think you really enjoy from the conversation. Before we get into that, though, I will also want to introduce our title sponsor, DistroKid. So DistroKid makes music distribution fun and easy with unlimited unlimited uploads, and artists get to keep 100% of their royalties and earnings. And we have a great code, 30% off, if you go to distrokid.com/VIP/love music more. You can get 30% off, and it also helps the podcast. 1 million plus artists rely on DistroKid to get their music onto Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, TikTok, Tidal, Instagram, and all the major streaming services. And there's also a great app. You're able to check, your money on the fly. You can get notifications when you got some new funds in there and withdraw all from the app. One of my favorite things about DistroKid is that you can actually collaborate with people and not have to deal with the accounting. DistroKid handles that for you. So you just send a little invite code or a split code, and you can even set up recoupments. Like, say, for example, if one person paid for $200 in Spotify ads, that person could get the first $200 and you don't even have to worry about it. They get reimbursed, and then the splits happen after that. It's just really nice because I don't want to be an accountant. I'm a musician. That's the exact opposite. No hate to accountants, no hate. But I just like the DistroKid does that for me. If you guys want to get started, support the podcast and get 30% off, best deal on the internet. Again, go to distrokid.com/VIP/love music more. Anyway, here is my conversation with Aaron. It was a really, really great time. I hope you enjoy it. Love music more. Love music more. Ooh, love music more. Love music more. Music more. Music more. Music more. What's good, everybody? Scoobert Dubert here. I am joined with Aaron Comes. What's up, my friend?
Hubert, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. We're going to be talking about your incredibly diverse and enviable career, from spin doctors to sideman solo work, and everything in between. I'm so excited to hear about kind of your career arc, what you've done with not just drums, but just musicality in general, your time on the road, your time with the Spin Doctors, your reunion with the Spin Doctors, making new music. I'm just so excited and so thrilled to have you on the show. So welcome.
Thanks so much for asking.
Yeah, I just want to start off back at music school. So you moved to New York City, you attend the new school. What was kind of the driving factor behind being like, you know what, I really want to do this. I want to take that next step and go, study music at a high level.
Well, I've basically studied since the day I started playing, I took drum lessons. Like, my first day as a drummer was walking into the Brook Maze in Dallas and meeting my teacher at the age of 9 years old named Jack Iden, who showed me how to hold the sticks, traditional grip, which is why I play like that.
Yeah.
So it goes way back, even though I'm an educated, drummer, I've always, seen early on the importance of, feeling and musicality and I didn't want to ever sound school,
Yes. Yeah.
To a degree. So, but then, we could talk a lot about that whole period, but since you asked about New York and what kind of led me there, basically it was a couple things. For one, I knew that I wanted to end up either in New York or LA, once I got to around a certain age, because it just seemed obvious that, for me to kind of reach the career goals that I had since a young age, I was going to need to be probably in one of those two cities. Especially at that time, it was sort of New York and LA. And And I was lucky to have teachers, like when I was in high school, that sort of got that in my head too. They're like, you could stick around Dallas and have a great career and do well, but if you really want to sort of reach the level that you seem to want to reach, you really need to go to New York and LA. So that was one driving force, a very big one, and I picked New York. The other one was as a musician and somebody that just wants to try to reach as high a level as possible and continue that. I wanted to be in a city that was just loaded up with the very best musicians in the world. And, both New York and LA have that. Particularly, I found myself drawn to New York because I really love jazz. And, all the great jazz musicians pretty much were living in New York. And especially at that time when I moved there in '88, many of them were still alive. There's a lot of them are, but a lot of them have passed since then. So I kind of wanted to be in that environment. I wanted to be able to go out every night and hear all my heroes play. And what led me to the new school was my old friend Roy Hargrove, the incredible trumpet player who
Yes.
sadly passed away. We went to high school together in Dallas at the Arts Magnet.
Oh,
We were good friends, and I did 1 year at Berkeley after I graduated, and then I went back to Dallas for a year and just did every gig under the sun before moving to New York. And I played with Roy a lot that year. And he knew I wanted to move to New York, and he had every intention of moving up there. He's a couple years younger than me. So we were driving in my car. We were doing a gig up in Denton.
cool.
Denton is North Texas. Now I got to say, Dallas and Denton is loaded up with incredible musicians. So it was really an incredible place to grow up because there were just so many incredible musicians. So anyway, me and Roy were in the car driving to Denton, and he handed me this flyer or this, package about the New School jazz program. And even though the New School of Parsons School of Design had been around for years, they just recently started a small music school there that this guy Arnie Lawrence started. He's an incredible sax player. He ended up being a good friend of mine. And it was kind of the opposite of North Texas or Berkeley or Miami University, where it was really small. All the faculty were these great jazz legends that I kind of moved up to, I wanted to be around anyway. It was incredible. Jim Hall, Reggie Workman, Jackie Byard, Bernard Purdy. I studied with Bernard Purdy privately.
So jealous.
So Roy was the guy that said, check out this school. So I was taking a year off school. My parents really were very much into me being in college. You got to have you got to have something to fall back on thing, which I knew I wasn't falling back on anything. I was going to be a musician, but truthfully, it gave me, my parents were very supportive of me. And they really wanted me to go to college and were willing to fund that for me. So I kind of saw it as my ticket to New York City. It was gonna be a couple things. I was going to continue my studies. I was going to get to sort of be around these legendary guys at the school, and it was going to be my ticket to get to New York City. And I figured I'm going to go to school. I'm going to try to break myself in. And pretty much as soon as I could afford my own rent, I quit. And I remember going home and telling my parents over dinner, listen, I'm good now.
Yep.
I don't need your money, and they were great. They were cool. And what's funny, and you probably realize this from talking to a lot of musicians, is that most of the higher level musicians, the people that have gone on to have decent careers, didn't make it through 4 years of college. They just got too busy and were gigging, which is what happened to me and so many others.
Yep.
We were just out gigging. So you didn't want to get up, you'd be out playing till 3 a.m. You didn't want to get up and go to school, So, and a lot of the teachers at the new school didn't want to get up and show up for their classes. They taught either. It was pretty funny. But anyway, so that's sort of the short story. That's sort of what led me to New York City. And then of course, there,
I like that, and I think that there are some really key little nuggets that I have heard from other musicians as well, where school is a great way to get integrated into a new city, meet a network, cut your teeth, get lessons with Bernard Purdy. Come on, ridiculous. Also one of the most positive, it seems like. You can tell me if this is the case, but at least externally, I've watched his, instructional DVDs and things like that. And he seems just like a positive little ray of sunshine. Is that what it actually was like studying with him?
Yeah.
Okay,
it was
cool.
it was. He is so positive and such a nice guy. And it was also completely different than any other kind of private lessons I'd ever had. Because and I was really lucky to have some incredible teachers. My first teacher, his name was Jack Iden. He had me on a practice pad for 2 years. He wouldn't let me get a drum set. So from 9 to 11, So I was from out of the gate. I was
Yeah,
learning rudiments and learning how to read snare drum etudes.
cool.
So that was really, and I didn't like it at
Yes.
the time, but
Uh-uh.
he said you'll thank me later, which I did. And then I studied with. I was really lucky to get hooked up with Rick Latham. You know Rick Latham,
Yeah, uh-huh.
that incredible book, Funk Studies. And when I
Right.
started with him, I was in seventh grade, and
Cool.
he was just about to put out that book. So I was working on that book like a few months before it came out.
Unbelievable.
Rick was great. You know, he got me in the chart reading and all that. And then he moved on to L.A. and hooked me up with Henry Oxtell. Henry Oxtell was the head drum instructor at North Texas. So Rick had studied with Henry, and a lot of it, the list of people that have studied with Henry is long. I mean, like Keith Carlock, Matt Chamberlain, a whole lot of really great drummers that went
Yeah.
through that, lived up there, studied
Yeah.
with him,
Right.
or at least a little bit. And so I studied with him all through high school, and he was really amazing. We got into some really advanced technical stuff, all while I was going to this school, the Arts Magnet High School, which was like half the day doing music, so doing theory and playing in symphony orchestra. I was playing in jazz combo. I was playing in big band, and then doing like jams and rock bands and all that on the side with my friends.
Yeah.
So anyway, so all my studying was more technical to that point, going through books, which I
Right.
still love to do to this day. But with Purdy, we didn't have one book. Basically, I brought in my little, I wish I had, I brought in my little tape recorder,
Uh-huh.
and and listen. He basically just sat there and almost was pretty much like listening to him preach for an hour. He'd talk. And sometimes I'd walk out of there and I'd be like, I don't even know what the hell he's talking about. What just happened? We didn't even play the drums. And I'd go home and I'd listen to the tape over and over because I was in awe of this guy. It's like my hero.
Yeah,
Just to be
right.
in the room, sitting him right in front of me was like kind of a mind blower.
Yes.
And as the year went on, he every now and then he'd say, okay, let's hear, play something, and he really he was really supportive of my drumming. And I remember like my parents came in one time and I had them come and meet him. And he
Cool.
had such nice things. He looked at my parents and he said, "Your son's going to make it." So
Uh,
when you have Bernard Purdy telling your parents that
yep.
you're going to make it,
Yep.
that was a really big deal for me, and it gave me a whole lot of confidence. So like, if anything, I walked out of those lessons with Purdy just feeling really good and confident because one of my idols had sort of given me the support. But I also learned a lot about, song playing and feel and sound. And I spent hours going back and listening to those tapes that we made. And so I got a lot out of it. But at the time I was kind of confused. He was talking a lot about like attitude, and
Okay.
I didn't understand what he was talking about. And so
Right.
but as the years went on, it was like these little light bulbs would go off in my head, a lot of the things he said. So it was really very cool, being able to work with him for a while.
What's good, guys? Scuba Dubert here for the Love Music More podcast, and I want to let you in on a little secret. One of my favorite new things, Minuendo lossless earplugs. So these are really, really, really cool. I've got two of them here. It comes in this awesome sweet box, but it comes with a bunch of little goodies like carrying case, tether, cleaning tools. But the real tech is in these little tiny lossless earplugs. My favorite thing about it is one, you can swap out any of the included tips. So depending on the size of your ear canal, we're all built different. You can get a nice, comfortable fit. But there's also this little lever on these adjustable versions that can go from 7 to 25 decibels of cutting. So depending on if you're listening to new metal or jazz, you can just hit the little lever and adjust in real time. And I think that's really, really cool. For the longest time, I was listening in those awful foam earplugs, and it makes the music sound like that. It just cuts off all of those high frequencies. And so I was always tempted to sneak them out a little bit. Oh, it's my favorite song, no earplugs. And then you get hearing damage. You have tinnitus after the show, and then you come back, you want to work in the studio, and guess what? Your ears aren't right. And that's why I love Minuendo, because you can just pop these in and have full fidelity with these lossless earplugs. There are two different versions. One is adjustable with the little lever, and then this one is fixed at 17 decibels. So check out Minuendo, Minuendo.com, or you can search them on Amazon and find Minuendo earplugs today. Get cracking. I love that. And one of my favorite educators, he told me, you're not going to really even know what you learned until 5-10 years from now.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's in many cases, it's very true, and nothing beats experience, I mean,
Yes.
you have to work really hard to put yourself in a situation where when you get that chance and that opportunity, you're ready for it. And, by the time I moved to New York, I guess I was about 19 or 20. So I was playing pretty well, but a lot happened. I was ready, like I had the fundamentals, but a lot happened right when I moved to New York that year. And it was also a very quickly I met the guys in the Spin Doctors, and that band was formed. So I was in this opportunity to play original music, and we were gigging like 5 nights a week. So I
Crazy.
was really in a good place to sort of develop a style. My style changed a lot, because I did what everybody did. I was, chops and I overplaying, and
Uh-huh.
that's great. You should do that when you're young.
Yeah, totally.
But that really reined me in, playing in clubs for people who are dancing and sort
Yes.
of locking into like, okay, don't if you play a bunch of bullshit, those girls are going to stop dancing. They don't care about that. So you hone into that, and it was a really sort of pivotal moment, and I think my transition into becoming a better musician.
That is the perfect way to put it too. You have these fundamentals, these rigorous fundamentals where you're working on snare etudes as a 9-year-old. That's awesome. But that allows you to have that foundation so that when you know you're ready, you're ready. You don't have to wait for the degree. You don't have to wait for the time. You've already put in your time. And now when opportunity calls like Spin Doctors, you're ready to pick up that phone and answer it.
And it's true what they say. You've heard a million people say you got to put in your 10,000 hours.
Yep.
And it's true. And by that time I already had.
Yeah, exactly.
And I put out another 10,000 real quick. But like you got to, it takes nothing can beat like the experience, and you got to spend that time in the practice room. I mean, I was pretty diligent practicer all through my early years. And then the year I went to Berkeley, that year straight out of high school,
Yeah.
that was the year I actually did the like 10 hours a day practice.
Yes.
I hit the sheds, as they say. And that was
How,
the best thing that happened that year for me.
I would love to know, how did you manage that in terms of just like biomechanics, like figuring out the way that you can push your body to practice 10 hours a day and not injure yourself? Because I know a lot of drummers fall off that cliff.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, you're young. I was 18
Right.
years old.
Yeah,
You're
exactly. That helps.
rarely do you have, and I always had good technique. So
Hmm.
I think my teacher was always making sure sit up straight and, try to, because you can't hurt yourself. But luckily I didn't have any problems. But what did happen to me that year, it was at Berkeley at the time, they didn't have drum sets in all the rooms. So you had to lug your drums around, like
Ugh.
everybody had like a locker, and you'd have to carry your drums to the practice room or to the room that you have an ensemble in, or at night people would have jam sessions. So I'm moving my drums around. Everybody is,
Yeah.
and then at the end of the school year, my back went out from carrying.
Mm.
I had this bag with all my hardware in. I
Oh,
used to call it the bag from hell. You just want to get there as quickly as possible.
totally.
So that thing fucked up my back, and so that was weird. And then
Yeah.
everything recovered fine.
Yeah.
But, I think you just got to be conscious. I don't really have an answer. Like when I think, well, what did I do to not hurt my hands? I didn't even think about it. It just
Yep.
wasn't a problem. But I mean, that's something that happens more as I've had some problems as I've gotten older.
Yeah.
With tendonitis, and I think
Yeah.
that almost every musician you talk to, if you play your instrument for a long time, you're going to have something.
Yep.
But you learn stretches, you learn to play, staying relaxed when you play whatever
Yeah.
instrument it is. And if it comes up a little bit, I've learned to I know what to do when that happens, and I don't freak out beat it. Like actually,
Yes.
just recently, I've had
Uh-huh.
some issues with my left hand, and it's
Yeah.
probably because I play like this,
Right. Right. Yeah.
other backbeats for years and years.
Uh-huh.
But it's not a problem. And I did a little OT for a while, and I know stretches, and it usually doesn't bother me. But like about 2 weeks ago, it was bothering me a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had a couple of gigs, and I wear this little thing around it if I need it.
Uh-huh.
And the main thing is I've learned not to panic.
Yes. That's a
And
good.
it always goes away. And you just stay on top of certain things. And so you gotta be like a little proactive with your body when you play an instrument for that long. But as far as those early sheds, when I was just doing what I had to do, and I think most people I know that have gone on for sort of to have long careers in music at some point, usually at a very young age, and really like right out of high school is the best time to do it, whether you're
Yep.
in college or not. It's like those are the. I mean, I remember reading like in Modern Drummer about like Dave Weckl and Vinny and all these guys saying they did that. They did their
Yes.
like 10 hours a day at Berkeley
Right.
or whatever. And I so in
Yep.
my mind, it's like, well, okay, well, I have to do that.
Exactly.
I just did it.
And I think that that's such a powerful part of like the mythology and passing the torches and stuff is reminding people like you got to put in the work. It's not just filming videos of yourself and
Yeah,
trying
well,
to go
that's the
viral.
problem these days, and but at the same time, like man, I mean, you see the level of musicianship and the
Yeah.
level, I mean, especially technically, I mean, what young drummers are doing is
Oh,
kind
I
of
know.
baffling. I mean,
It is.
we weren't coming close to that back then, and
Especially the quick twitch stuff. I'm seeing like just crazy like I love it. It's really cool. Like Domi and JD Beck kind of
oh yeah,
stuff.
I
Just
love him. I love
so
him. I
cool.
love that band.
Yeah.
They're a great example, I think, of like some young people that are just next level and technically, but like music, like they're
Yeah.
making great music. I like them. So a lot of the stuff I hear, it's just like it's like a sport, and there's no
Right.
music. But
Totally.
Jay, but Beck, that guy, I
Yeah.
mean, that shit is just fantastic, And I guarantee you, I mean, they spend a lot of time. I mean, they're you have to, they're gifted, I'm sure, but you don't just wake up one day and play like that.
Nope.
You know what
No,
I mean?
no
So
way.
I always tell people when I teach, I don't teach a lot, but every now and then somebody will roll through New York and call me up, and I'll give a private lesson.
Yeah.
And the two things that I always say, first of all, I say simplify everything. I always have somebody just play me a straight beat,
Yeah.
and nobody can do it. It's like no, no, no. Take everything away,
Yes.
and and then also that you have to like, especially if you're young, now's the time. Like you can do it right now. Like practice. You got to put in those hours.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's no way around it really.
No.
I mean, look, there's some people that just are great that never take a lesson, never practice, but they probably play all the time.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
you got to get those hours in, whether it's just playing or practicing or hopefully a combination of both.
Yeah, totally. Well, because when you play a lot, then you start to understand what you should actually practice. Because you run into
Exactly,
those
it's a
brick
big
walls.
difference making them. And that's the downside of practicing too much too. Is if you're not playing with people, then it's because it's not just about playing by yourself. So it's very important to do both. And again, look, I'm not here to preach how anybody should do it. I'm
Yeah.
telling you how I did it.
Uh-huh.
This is what worked for me, and I do think though that it's important. You got to put in that time, for
Yeah.
sure.
And I like those universals. And you want to put in time onto the things that you're actually going to use. Like, for example, when I was studying, I did a lot of songwriting stuff, but songwriting under pressure, songwriting with a topic, songwriting with its deadline, turn it around. And that has been the most influential, important thing in my career is being able to get stuff done quickly that's still cool. But I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't practiced that since.
Right. Yeah, that's a great skill, and like from from a drumming point of view, like you have to be able to, like, for instance, going in the studio,
Yeah,
and
right.
I mean, usually 9 times out of 10, you're learning the song right
Yep,
then, and so
exactly.
you need to be able to act quickly and come
Yes.
up with something that is compositionally going to be work well for the song, and do it quickly and do it great. There's no time. So that's a great tool that you studied, in the songwriting end. That applies to so many things.
Absolutely. And then the other thing that I've noticed with young drummers is some of them get scared of the click and some of them get scared of not having the click.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, something I used to do that during that year at Berkeley when I was doing the 10 hour a day.
Yeah.
About 2 hours a day, I would play a straight beat
Uh-huh.
to a click, different
Yeah.
tempos, just
Oh.
boom, bop, boom, and just not move for like an hour.
Yes. Sweet.
And that was where I really got my feel and my time together,
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's another thing I would suggest to young drummers is just, practice all the other stuff, everything. And I do recommend practicing to a metronome or a
Yeah.
click. I mean, that's really important. But yeah, just doing a straight beat over and over, it almost becomes like a meditation after a while. You're not even in your body, but
Uh-huh.
it really helped me get my feel together and my time together. Because
I-
you're gonna end up having to play to a click. I mean, it's ruined a lot of drummers' careers.
Totally.
You saw how many people back in the '80s like just lost their gigs because all of a sudden, if you couldn't play to a click in the studio, you were gone.
Yeah. And
You
you
know.
can't, not everybody's going to get a gig like Aaron Copland with the Police or something like that, where they're going to be like, okay, you were gonna move around a little bit, but we're gonna play around you, and like not everybody
Yeah,
gets that kind of perfect band setup. A lot
yeah,
of times, yeah,
exactly.
I love it. Hey everybody, Scoobert Dubert here. I'm excited to announce my new record, I, as in the letter I. It is available on all streaming platforms now, as well as on Bandcamp with high-res .wave files. So usually you hear the compressed MP3s or things to the streaming services. These .wave files, they sound the best. They absolutely do. It is science. I'm actually going to be posting a blog article about why waves sound better than MP3s, and that leads me to my next topic. I started a blog, and we are pressing vinyl. So whoever is subscribed to the blog is going to get first dibs on the limited edition vinyls. We're talking like some super, super limited edition. I think they're only doing like 10 or 15 of the, top shelf stuff. And then there will be other really cool colorways as well. But the whole vinyl run is not that big because I'm not that big. Hopefully someday we'll be able to press more. But until then, you gotta jump on it now. So join the blog, join that mailing list. It's all free, and then you'll be able to get first dibs on that vinyl of I as it's being pressed. And on that blog, we're also going to be doing stuff for like show notes and other musical topics that require a little bit more visual component. So for example, I just did a pod not too long ago on musical notation throughout the history. It'd be kind of cool to see like what it actually looks like throughout history, right? And that's what the blog's here for. It'll hit your emails just like every Tuesday morning is kind of what we're looking at. And it'll just be a nice extra little way to love music more, expand the understanding from the podcast, and also hook you up with some exclusive perks like first dibs on vinyl records. So anyway, check out the new music. Hopefully subscribe to that Substack. You'll find the link in my show notes, or you could go to lovemusicmore.substack.com to sign up today, and we'll send you some emails. So enjoy the music and enjoy the rest of the episode. And I also like the meditation part of practice. I think that a lot of people, like you're saying, like would tense up when they're practicing. Like, I got to get this really hard thing down. But instead, like even just like when I've run scales on guitar or just these simple little like string skipping things, just doing it over and over until you fall into almost like a dreamlike state. It's very enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean, I could talk a lot about practice. There's so many different elements, and
Yeah.
the way I approach it now is different than the way I approached it when I was 18.
Interesting.
And
Yeah,
I go through periods where I practice. I mean, it's just one of those things that's ingrained in me. A lot of times I don't have the time to do it because of my schedule, but
for sure.
when I do have the time, I really love it. I'll get into a routine. I actually got really into it during the COVID pandemic.
Okay. Yeah.
It was, I just got in like a daily. There's nothing to do. I got into a daily practice routine, but
Yeah.
but now I can't practice 10 hours a day. I mean, it's like
No.
I find that for me, and this is another thing that I would recommend to anybody, really at any age, is like you're better at practicing for 45 minutes, really focused, than 3 hours of just sort of meandering or going in there and playing what you're great at and feeling like you're the best. That's the worst thing you can do. I mean, I always think like if you sound like shit when you're practicing, then you're making progress. Work on stuff that you have trouble with. So that's what I do now when I practice. Sometimes I'll just go on and improvise and just want to sort of create music, But most of what I do, I kind of look at it as like sharpening the pencil. It's almost like going to the gym. I don't really enjoy it that much, to be honest, at this point. But I'll run through books, or I'll run through exercises, or I'll even just do things that I know I'm having trouble with. So again, like if you sound incredible in practice, that's probably not a good sign.
I really like it. I'd love to go back to kind of when you were starting with the Spin Doctors and kind of that defining moment in terms of like launching your career, getting you into that pop music world. How did that happen? How did you connect with the other guys, and then how did you go from that to gigging 5 times a week, and then we'll get to the rest of the stuff after that.
Yeah. Well, again, as you know, we covered. I moved to New York. When I moved to New York, I really had only one goal in mind, which was to become as good of a musician as I could and to make a living doing it. And I really equally had as much interest in being a jazz musician, a studio sideman musician, and a drummer in like a rock band.
Yeah, because you got to do them all.
I've always loved all. When I think about the music that I grew up with, I mean, I loved Led Zeppelin and guys like John Bonham, but I listened to everything Steve Gadd did, and then I was a massive like Elvin Jones, Tony Williams, freak. So, and I still am. But what happened, just again, you never know which way your career is going to go. I had only been up there about a month, and I was practicing at the new school, and I got a knock on the door, and it was Eric Shankman, who's the guitar player for the Spin Doctors. And he said, "Hey, man, I'm Eric. You sound great. I got a gig. I'm putting a band together. Would you be interested?" And I
Cool.
was like, I was like, "Okay, let's jam. Let's check it out."
Yeah.
And him and Chris had already met each other and were sort of putting something together. So that was basically how I met those guys. And the cool thing was we had a gig. They had a gig at Delta Phi Fraternity House at Columbia University. So our very first gig was in this basement of the frat house, totally packed, and everybody was like on shrooms. So it was the perfect way to start a band because.
Yes.
And we had a bigger lineup. We had a different bass player at the time. This guy, Michael Kerr from the New School. John Popper from Blues Traveler
Cool.
played with us because him and the Blues Traveler guys were at the New School as well.
Nice.
And so that was kind of how I got into it. And then it just sort of developed from there. And after a while, I was like, this band's pretty cool. I was sort of like, maybe I'll. We were writing, and I was able to write. I've always loved composing music.
Yes.
And they were very open to my writing, and so I had a guy like Chris, who's a great lyricist, who was psyched to write songs with me, and that was something that really sort of pulled me in. I think ultimately that was the thing that was like, oh wow, this is like, not only in playing drums with this thing, but I'm contributing musically. And it was just a very creative thing. And I saw that we started to do well very quickly. Like, I mean, our second gig, we had like nobody there, but the first gig was great, and then we built it up. Within about 7-8 months, we were part of this scene in New York City with like Blues Traveler and other bands. And we had a fan base going. And so I just sort of said like, okay, I'm going to give this a shot for like a year or two. I'm going to go ahead. I was still at the school, and I was like, I'm going to give this a shot. And like, because we were playing a lot. We were playing like 5 nights a week in New York City,
Yeah, seriously.
And eventually, it was a good decision because, within a couple years, the scene really grew big. And, ultimately we got a record deal and, all that. So, but it's interesting. And I think like, again, making those decisions when you're young, when you're starting out is so important. Because I could have easily just said, you know what, because I was having a lot of other people asking me to do other gigs because we were out there all the time. So I was like out there. So people were hearing me. And that's the best way to get heard. And it's the best way to get work is you got to be out there. But I was out there in like a band thing. So I didn't have the time to say yes to a lot of these gigs because we were playing so much.
Yeah.
But I could have easily just transitioned into like side guy real quick.
Totally.
But I made a decision like this band, I really see the possibilities of this thing doing well. And it wasn't like, oh my God, I want to be a rock star and I want to make up all this money. We were very organic, our main goal was like, let's write good songs and let's pay our rent,
Yeah. Right.
But obviously I saw beyond the potential. So I said, I'll give it a couple of years and it was a good decision. So for young people, like if, you don't want to make a bad decision and put all your eggs in one basket, it's not really good. But sometimes you have to pass on the temptation to maybe take that wedding gig or that cover band gig that's going to maybe put a lot of money in your pocket.
Yeah.
And you might have to do that at some point. That's totally cool. I got no issue with that at all. But especially when you're young and you can be broke and you can live in a shitty apartment, or maybe you have a little support from your family, whatever it is, that's the time to make those important decisions because they could end up shaping your whole life,
Yeah. A quick question I know that there are a lot of drummers that want to work on the songwriting kind of side, or they're in a band and they want to kind of be sculpting the music in that way and not just only kind of wear the drummer hat or have the perspective of the drummer chair. How would you recommend kind of navigating that or contributing to that or growing your chops in such a way that as a drummer you can be an active songwriting in the band?
Well, I think it's just like anything. It's something you have to enjoy doing, and I mean, obviously, you need to play other instruments. I mean, I've always played guitar and piano and bass. I've always been sort of drums is my thing, but I've been a bit of a instrumentalist, for a long time. And guitar is the instrument I usually write on. So I've just sort of always written music on guitar. Yes. And that's like all my solo records that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Right. All those songs are written on guitar,
Cool. Yes. was going to ask you
And
about that.
so, it's like anything, you just have to be open-minded. You have to listen to lots of music, practice that. I'm not like a great guitar player, but I like coming up with parts and melodies. And so it was just sort of natural for me. So I don't really know. I mean, obviously,
Yeah.
if you present a bunch of shit, nobody's going to be interested. I mean, it's got to be like you got to be able to to come to the party with something that is going to work in that situation, and get the other guys excited to want to use it. And if they don't, then that's just the way it is, And if it's good, if you're coming up with cool music, people are going to be excited about it. And if you're not, they're not. I mean, it's just the way it is. It's like when you make a record, or everybody's contributing, and you have a pool of songs. I mean, usually the best ones are the ones that sort of rise to the top, So, but luckily in this band, everybody's collaborated. Everybody brings something to it, and is open to everybody else's contributions. So it's a hard question, because
sure.
I've devoted most of my life to being a drummer. So it's easier for me to sort of give advice on that than as a writer. But it's just the writing thing is just such a natural. It's not something I studied. It's just something that I think that for me, like I have an acoustic guitar over there. I play guitar a lot. I don't ever practice guitar. I never have ever sat and worked on scales or chords. I'm usually just sort of composing. That's sort of the way I practice. I'm usually just working on something, and and I'm sitting there playing the same thing for like an hour,
Right.
Or in developing it. And if it's good enough, maybe I'll remember it tomorrow.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
But no, it's a good answer. Creating that. I have some drummer friends that are very similar, where they're not really guitarists, but they have just enough chops to be able to communicate the ideas that they have in their heads, and that's really important. Just like kind of skill barrier to clear, so that you can come to that party and communicate what you're hearing, rather than trying to like tell the guitarist, which I'm sure you felt as a drummer, where they're like trying to communicate a drum beat but lack the vocabulary or the chops to be able to communicate it to you. It's like, no, it's more like like they're trying to, but being able to flip to the other side of that and do that on guitar, so that other people can, get to what's inside.
You have to be able to pick up the instrument and show it to the guys.
Right.
And then you also have to be willing to not be so precious with it that you let them turn it, you want them to make it their own,
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Eric, I have a good relationship with Eric, the guitar player, who's a great writer. And we sometimes we'll collaborate on stuff,
Yeah.
Like any of the songs that I've written, and shown him the parts for, he's always really receptive. And ultimately, he respects the parts that need to be there completely. But they've always turned into his own thing.
Totally.
And that's important, and sometimes I think with writing, sometimes in music in general, I mean, this is kind of a weird thing to say, but sometimes your limitations you can use to your advantage. Like I think that, sometimes I see like, it's sometimes maybe if there's just too much, especially in rock, especially in pop or rock, like, you don't want things to get too complicated, harmonically. And so, I mean, I just come from a sort of a simple melodic place with writing. I want to come up with I always want to come up with a piece of music that sort of stands out on its own before we add vocals to it, so there's some sort of hooks there, and but never too complicated. I mean, I definitely contribute. I think being a drummer and being into rhythm, I like using sort of, without really thinking about it, a lot of the stuff I write is an odd time sometimes.
Cool.
But I like to think that I always try to make the odd time thing feel natural, not feel like an odd time, And I mean, Zeppelin did that so well. Like think of some of the riffs, there's some of those, like the ocean, I mean, you're not thinking that's in Seven,
right?
It's just like the ocean.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, I don't know. It's a tough question to answer, but hopefully there's a little insight.
No, there is, and I've always thought that odd time is such an interesting perspective into kind of people's ways of thinking about music or thinking about danceability. Yeah, you can do the odd time thing in like a math rock way, or you can do it in the like folk way, where it's like you're just kind of dancing a certain way to this music. It's not meant to confuse you or put you in a blender necessarily.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny watching people though. It's funny that you say that, because Chris, our singer, he moves around on stage a lot, and on instrumental sections, he dances around a little bit, and he always sort of comments on like sometimes the songs that have like there's a new song that's going to be on our new record.
Cool.
and it's called Double Park, and one of the riffs is in 7,
Yeah.
and then it goes to 4 on the verse. And he was, and when we first started playing it live, he was like, "Yeah, I'm still sort of trying to figure out my dance move, my dance on that."
Yes.
It's funny,
It is. It
But
is.
it has a real natural feel to it. But still, if you're dancing, you are missing that beat, right?
Totally.
I was just like, just keep going. It'll come back around if you just,
Exactly. Yeah, there's a funny thing in social media. It's like everything's in 4/4 if you don't count it like a nerd.
Exactly.
It'll come back around.
Always comes back around eventually.
Yeah, exactly. No, I love it. So you go from that, and then you get the record deal. I'm so curious about kind of recording your first record as the band. Did you think that those gigs helped influence kind of your sound and the ways that you were going, like seeing the ways that people were dancing to your music, for example? Did that influence what kind of parts you were writing, and then ultimately influence the sound that was laid down on that first LP?
Definitely. I mean, we had over 200 gigs under our belt.
Wow.
By the time we went in the studio. And this is only like, I don't know, we've maybe been a band like 3 years, I think, by the time we went in the studio.
Yeah.
We played, we literally played that often. So,
yeah,
a lot of those, most of those, in fact, all those songs we had played, some of them hundreds of times already, So we had a sound, we had a real sound going in, and the songs were just felt, dug into.
Totally.
So, but what's interesting, and I was just talking to a friend about this the other day, the first session we did, I'm pretty sure the first session we ever did for Epic Records, so it was our biggest session to date for any of us, inside or outside of the band. We're at the Power Station, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Epic Records, we're making our first record. And for that session, we had a producer named Frank Aversa, and Frankie LaRocca, who was our A&R guy, but he was co-producing. He's a drummer, a great guy. So the first song we recorded was Two Princes.
Cool.
The very first song, and I'm thinking I was thinking about this the very first major session I ever did, and the first song the Spin Doctors ever recorded was by far our biggest hit, and probably the biggest thing I'm ever going to do in my whole life. It's like I kind of started my career like that.
Right.
It's kind of weird,
That is.
And it's amazing.
So cool.
But it also goes back to what we were saying before, is like, you better be ready for that opportunity. Because that was kind of like my moment, even though, I was there, I was in the band, we were all there, but like, okay, here we are, you're recording, you better have it together,
Sorry to interrupt this very important broadcast, but it's time for one more advertisement for myself for this podcast. What I'm asking for is for you to rate it 5 stars, share it with your friends. This is like the most important thing for this podcast to grow. So if you want to do this, you go onto the podcast screen, right? You click on the ... on Spotify. Under there, it says rate show, and you go and you click it 5 stars. If you could do that for me, that's the best way for the algorithms and all this stuff to share it out with the world. I know that it's a lot to ask, but if you could please just hit those 3 dots and then a 5 star, it would really help us out and helps us, get the word out and spread the love of music. So thank you. If you're listening on YouTube, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much. And here's the rest of the episode.
And that was an interesting, I've told the story, I'm going to tell it real quickly.
Go for it.
They wanted me to use a big Ludwig snare drum. It was like that, because we were coming out of the 80s. This is like 1990, 91 when we recorded it. I was like 22 years old. And they wanted us to use like this. They wanted to go for that big sound. And I had my Brady. My Bradys were all set up. I had my Brady piccolo. I was ready for that was our sound, And we basically spent about half the day fighting over the drum sound. And this was also like back when they still spent half a day or a whole day working on drum sounds.
Drum sounds, yeah.
Which never happens now. But part of that was arguing over the snare. Ultimately, we stuck to our guns and they gave up, and we used the Brady snare because I think that was a good move, right?
I agree.
But anyway, so that's a little insight to that. And then from there, we recorded about like, I don't know, 6 or 7 songs. That was going to be like an EP.
Yeah.
And then we scratched that and decided let's do a live EP instead, because we're such a live band.
Right.
So we recorded live at the Wetlands. So Up for Grabs, it was called. It came out. So then we decided, okay, we're going to take 3 songs from that session we did, Two Princes being one of them.
Yeah.
Shimbo and Ali Hard to Exist were the other 2. And then we're going to go back and finish the record, Pocket Full of Kryptonite. Yeah. And so we went into RPM Studios. For that session, we used Peter Denenberg, who was the guy who engineered the live record, and we loved Peter. And we, nothing against Frank Aversa, who did a great
Yeah.
job, but we decided let's finish this record with Peter and Frankie LaRocca. And so we went in and recorded that second batch of songs. And we were just so busy because we were gigging constantly, going to the studio. It was just like a nonstop thing.
Yeah.
And that was that. And then, we put out the record and it did absolutely nothing for a year. It was just dead on arrival. Epic Records really couldn't give a shit about us. Nirvana came out the same. I think our record came out 1 week before Nirvana, actually, believe it or not.
Wow.
So Nirvana came out and blew the roof off the industry.
Yeah.
And then Pearl Jam, who was also on Epic Records, their record came out. And Epic put all their money into Pearl Jam.
Totally.
And so we'd be traveling around the country, playing gigs, going into record stores, Pearl Jam, everywhere on the windows, and we'd be lucky if we found our copy. And we'd be calling our manager and our label, what's up with this? They just didn't care. They didn't see us as any. They saw us as like this baby band that was maybe going to develop over time. And anyway, so a year in, we had a big meeting with them. And they said, we want you guys to come off the road and make a new record. This record's dead. There's no hits. And we said, well, we're touring around. We're like packing clubs all around the country. We're not taking any tour support from you. We're self-sufficient. We've sold 60,000 records with no help from you at all, which at the time was not good, but it's pretty good when you're getting nothing, And thanks to our manager, David Sonnenberg, at the time said, fuck these guys. Let's go back on the road. I can smell it. There's a buzz happening.
Yeah.
I think something something could happen here. And so we did that. And a radio station in Vermont, WEQX, started playing Little Miss. It went to #1. He wrote a letter to the president of Epic, and boom, they made a video, put it on the radio, and everything blew up.
Yeah.
So it was interesting. It was a good decision. Like, I think the moral of the story is stick to your guns. Don't listen to what other people tell you. Be yourself. Don't try to copy what other bands are doing at the time,
right?
Or other drummers, or listen to what the business people tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it was a very different time than it is now. I mean, it's so difficult for a band to that kind of thing doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, the touring thing exists.
Yeah.
And, but like the idea of like, having a good band, developing a following, getting a label, getting on the radio, getting on MTV, and boom, you're huge. As hard as that was and as rare as that was then, it could happen. It almost seems easy now compared to what there is now today for a young artist, It's weird.
Yeah. But there are always these little through lines that no matter how the medium or the method of discovery changes, some of these things, are eternal.
There's plenty of, I mean, I think that, there's tons of great music.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those guys that's all dark on the industry or think, you hear people saying, oh, the music's dead. It's like, no, it's not. It's just changed. And I see the talent pool out there now is incredible.
Yeah.
And like you said, the younger, they're going about it in a different way. It is harder. There's no question it's harder for them to make a living. And that's a real bummer. That needs to change. But there's a lot of acts out there that have developed, great followings and do very well out on the road. And so it's ultimately, you don't get into this to become rich. You get into this because you love music.
Exactly.
And if you can do well along the way, that's great, But I think that, regardless of how my career would have gone, Spin Doctors, no Spin Doctors, success, no success, I'd still be doing this to this day. I'm a lifer. I always knew I would be. And I'm grateful for how it's turned out, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's the real key. There are far easier ways if you're going to put this much time into something to make some money.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it if you're only in it for the money,
Yeah, totally.
I mean, you listen, you can make a lot of money, and it used to be a lot easier to make a lot of money, but don't start it for that reason. Be smart. You have to be smart. You have to know your business. I mean, you don't want to get screwed over. And we were lucky. We were, I'd seen some other people. We had all seen some other people, get screwed or make mistakes, and we had a good team around us. And we were very self-sufficient. We were very leery of letting people in. Even when the record companies and management started, scouting us, we basically just were sort of, for a long time, we were just like, we don't want, we don't.
Yeah.
No, we said no to a lot of stuff, because we were self-sufficient. We were making our living. We were like a little business.
Yes.
And so you do have to be careful. And let's face it, like they don't teach. A lot of musicians aren't very good with that. So,
Yeah.
but it's
Well,
important. Not that you have to go to
totally.
business school, but like just be on top of that. For
Yep.
sure.
And even if you did go to business school, a lot of the stuff in the industry is intentionally. It's not. Yeah.
It can be very confusing,
Yeah.
for sure.
So
I mean,
having
I learned it through just being there, like, hands on. And I'm one of those guys that really wants to understand everything.
yeah.
I'm pretty good at, I could probably teach a business music class,
Okay.
but yeah, it's really, it can be really confusing.
Yeah. How did you feel after you kind of win that argument with your Brady snares, piccolo snares? How did you feel when you heard the herd of drummers kind of go more over to your side as the '90s evolved? Did you feel like, hey, I planted my flag in the sand, and now you guys are all kind of marching over in that direction? Did you feel some of that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't want to
Yeah.
take any credit for that. I don't know how much I had a part of that, but I was
Certainly
just
were part
happy
of it.
that it sounded so good.
Yeah. Exactly.
Still to this day, I mean, the fact that song in particular is still
Yeah.
such a big song. I mean, I hear it all. I'm just like, every time I hear it, I'm just like, man, I'm so glad it sounds so good.
Yes.
I mean,
Totally.
it really does. And the stars just aligned.
Yes.
But yeah, I'm proud that we stuck up for ourselves. And I always just wanted to have like my own sound.
Yeah.
Like the drummers that I gravitated to have always been guys with their own sound. Like John Bonham. You knew
Yeah.
who he was exactly. Stuart
100%.
Cope, who had the high snare.
Totally. Totally.
And Bill Bruford.
Uh-huh.
When those guys hit their snare drum, you knew in pretty much one beat who it was.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was always sort of searching for that. And when I moved to New York,
Uh-huh.
I'm a Yamaha guy now, and
Yeah.
one of my first kits was my Steve Gadd Yamaha kit, which I
Cool.
still have. I actually use that on the road right now.
Nice.
It's incredible.
Awesome.
And I had been endorsed with Yamaha for like 15 years. I love them.
Yeah.
But at the time when Spin Doctors got our record deal,
Uh-huh.
we had a little bit of money to go out and buy some instruments. And I really was searching. I was like, I want to find something a little different. And so I went up to Manny's Music, and I was thinking maybe I'll get like a Sonar. That's kind of a little different sound. And
Yeah.
I'd already had some different drums. Like I had this Fleischmann snare drum, which was pretty cool. And I was definitely doing the sort of cranked up snare thing.
Yeah.
But I found these drums, they just come in called Brady's from Australia. So I got those drums, and I just loved them. They just really have a unique sound. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm just grateful for the fact that it sounds good.
Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Because you're gonna hear it everywhere forever. It's like in stores.
Yeah, that would suck if it didn't sound very good.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. How did it feel when you ended up on the cover of some of these incredible magazines? Modern Drummer, Rolling Stone. How did that feel like to get an issue of that you were you're talking about growing up and like reading these and trying to learn?
And that was pretty incredible. I will not lie. Those two in particular, because I grew up. I read every issue of Modern Drummer since I was like 12.
Wow.
So
Yes.
that was always. In fact, when I was, one of the things my drum teacher in high school, Henry Oxtell, told me to do was he said, I want you to write down 5 goals for the next 10 years.
Okay.
And write it down, keep it, and so I did. And and he's like, you can look back at this every once in a while and make sure that you're meeting these goals. And one of the goals was to be on the cover of Modern Drummer.
Yes. Awesome.
I mean, I was shooting high, but it was a goal.
Yeah.
So that was like when I'll still remember when I got the call that I was going to be on the cover of Modern Drummer. It was probably one of the greatest days of my life. I mean, come on. And particularly back then when Modern Drummer was such a huge thing. I mean, now it's kind of weird now, And then Rolling Stone is like, come on, that's the Rolling Stone, And in those days, I mean, it was all about magazines and that kind of a thing. It's not like, if you're on the cover of a magazine now, it's more about posting it on your social media.
Totally.
People are going to see that than the actual magazine. But those were both incredibly big moments for sure that I really, really appreciate a lot,
Really awesome. And then you also, so as we were talking about in the beginning, you were talking about the crossroads. Or do I want to do more sideman work? Do I want to do my own stuff? Do I want to play in this band? You ended up doing it all. So you have, what did I see? 300 records, over 300 records on sideman stuff. That's absolutely incredible. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that, and then I also love to hear a little bit more about Catskills Cry, where you are currently in the Catskills.
Yeah, so basically, so the spins, we had our whole thing in the 90s, all the
Yeah.
crazy, all that. And then things sort of slowed down, the record sort of slowed down. We went through the sort of, thing where it was just band members left and it was sort of things were rocky for a while. So we,
Yeah.
we sort of took a break and it gave me an opportunity to focus more on like doing other stuff.
Yeah.
So I started to try to put myself more as a guy that could be hired, gun for hire. And I did some producing, and I built a studio in my place, and that was an interesting transition because, I was a known guy, but more known as being a guy in the Spin Doctors, not a
Yeah.
guy that like, plays on a lot of records. So
Uh-huh.
I remember it was a little bit of a challenge to sort of like get people to start calling me,
Yeah.
and but ultimately, I just started putting myself out there. I started playing more in town, locally, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden, you get a rep. Oh, this guy can do this stuff too. So, from there, I started doing a lot of record dates and stuff, and you meet a few producers that like you and hire you, and
Yep.
so that just sort of snowballed into a great thing, which I do a lot of to this day, and I love it, and it's a different it's good for both sides of the coin, being in a band or being a sideman session guy, because I think a lot of times people in band just get away with murder for years because they're in a band and they think they can do whatever they want. They can show up late or they can make
Yeah.
mistakes. And I never had that attitude. I'm like, and then when you go on a session, maybe in a band you're a little more stubborn. Like for instance, with Two Princes, I'm like, well, I'm going to use my sound, my snare.
Yes.
Now you're not going to do that in a session. If
No.
somebody doesn't like what your sound and they make a suggestion, and you fight them on it, then see you later. So
Right.
you got to be, you have to be willing to adapt your sound, your playing, whatever, to that particular artist, song, and producer. And I love doing that. So
Yes.
and then I guess. Around 2006, I wanted to make my own record. As we were saying, I write a lot of music. So I had all this sort of music, these sort of instrumental, songs that I wanted to do a record. So I put a band together, a pretty amazing band. I got Tony Levin and Bill Dillon to play on this record called Catskills Cry. We recorded it in Woodstock
Cool.
in 2006. And then since then, I've put out 3 other original records. So I have 4 out. And, I have my sort of regular band with Teddy Kumpel and Richard Hammond, and we play around. In fact, we're playing Monday night at the Bitter End, and Vernon Reed's going to play with us, guitar player, and Keith Loftus on sax, and Leon Grumbaum plays this instrument called the Sam Chilean. So that's been a really, really fun, creative vibe for me and live, we really stretch out inside of the material. It's very improvisational. It's sort of like, in a way, I feel like it's sort of the ultimate fuse of everything I do, and we really stretch out. And I play a lot. It's like, I'm playing a lot busier than I would be like on a record date or even with the Spin Doctors, but it's musical,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
there's no bullshit. I mean, and to me, like, play as many notes as you want, as long as they fit the music and they're honest, and truthful. That's what it's all about. I can tell when somebody's just full of shit or they're playing some lick, and I always use Tony Williams as a great example. I mean, some of the, he's playing all kinds of crazy, complex stuff, but I've never heard one thing he did that didn't sound completely honest, musical, and real. So that's for me, that's what it's all about. Whether it's the most simple thing or the most complicated thing, it's just gotta be honest. And as long as you're honest, you're cool.
I love that. That brings me perfectly to a question that we love to ask every guest. So this show is called Love Music More. The segment's called Love Music Why. This is just a moment to ask you, why are you excited every time you come back the next day and play music or create music or make music with other people? What is it about music that is so worth the sacrifice and the time and the journey that you've had throughout this long career, and that you're excited about for the next phases? What is it about music that makes you love it?
That's a big
It's
question.
a heater, right?
It's very deep. It's very involved. I mean, ultimately, I think I always try to think about like, what got me into this in the first place, and like, that feeling when you're a child and you first listening to like your favorite bands, or you start playing an instrument, and if you can somehow keep that level of enthusiasm when you're older, I try to think about that. It's not easy to do all the time because, as if you're out there, I mean, look, a lot of it's getting on an airplane, waking up at 4 in the morning, sitting in a hotel room for 4 hours, sound check. There's a lot of that. But to get back to the point, whenever and sometimes I don't want to play. Sometimes I'm like, I'm tired. I'd rather like just go out for dinner than do this gig. But it never fails when you start playing. And especially if you have a good night and everybody you're playing music with is together, nothing beats that feeling, of when you're in it, and the feeling you have afterwards, is just so gratifying. And so for me, it's like, when I have a good show or I record something I'm proud of, I don't think there's anything that makes me feel better. It's just sort of like my lifeline. It gets me through, and you put everything that's going on into the music. If you're going through some good times or some bad times or whatever your emotions are, if you're doing it right, you're putting them in there every time you play, whether you think about it or not. But so it's sort of like, sometimes it'll just sort of heal me. And if you have a really good gig, like sometimes, especially when I play with my band, we don't play that much. We play like once every month or 2 months, usually in New York City. But sometimes I'll do a gig, and if it's a really good gig, like it'll lift me up for like 2 weeks. You know what I mean? It's like a drug or something, and then it goes away, and you got to do it again. But ultimately, I think it's and also when people come out and enjoy what you're doing. I mean, that's sort of the ultimate reward. I mean, let's face it, we started doing this for ourselves, but ultimately, you're out here to create something for people to listen to and enjoy. And that's what music is, so it's like, it's always this balance. Ultimately, I believe you have to do it for yourself. I think if you're thinking about your audience or trying to please people, that's a big mistake. But once you get through that creative process, you are giving it out to people, and you are, especially when you're performing, you do have I think it's a duty to go like give a good performance, and show up prepared and do the best you can, and so when it all comes together, you and the band and the people and everybody has a good time, nothing beats it. So that's what keeps you going, those 4 a.m. lobby calls.
Great answer. Love that. Where can people get in touch with you or hire you, or what would be a great way if somebody had another question or wants to book you for a private lesson or something?
You can go to my website, which is aaroncomas.com, and there's contact. I'm not great with keeping it up to date, but there's information there. Instagram, Facebook are great places to reach me. And I always try to get back to people when they message me, and write back. And I love hearing from people. And any questions or whatever, feel free to write in, and I'll try to get back to you.
Well, thank you so much for your time on this show. I really enjoyed this episode, this conversation.
Scoobert, thanks for having me, man. This was a lot of fun.
It's a pleasure, Aaron.
All right.
Until next time.
Take care.